The world is a complex place. As such, the question you might be asking is, how do we build a consistent system of thought? And this is important if you want to ground yourself, if you want to orient yourself in what is otherwise a complex and chaotic world. Now, one way to answer this question is to consult the resources of philosophy and think about deductive logic. And especially the important aspect of deductive logic, which is where the conclusion must logically be deduced from the premises. So you could basically look at any standard syllogism and you would see this principle at play. Now, Euclidean geometry is itself a kind of deductive logic and a kind of deductive system. And this is because Euclid writes definitions, and the definitions work to define the terms and ideas that he's going to use in his system, in his geometrical system. And he also has propositions that work to build on the definitions and make certain assertions and assumptions. The important thing to keep in mind is that this Euclidean system is a self-contained system that essentially proves itself. And this is important because it basically makes the system airtight and irrefutable. Now, in general, deductive systems start with what could be called first principles, and these are principles that are unchanging and self-evident. Now, in day-to-day life and in day-to-day thought, we of course know that we do not think like Euclid. The world is not structured like a Euclidean proof, like a geometrical proof, and so that makes things difficult. But in order to think about this idea of first principles, which are again principles that are unchanging and self-evident, it might be helpful to look at a branch in philosophy, and that would be metaphysics. So metaphysics is of course asking the question, what is reality? And it seeks to posit what reality is. Now, if you look at various philosophies through time, you get very interesting first principles, but I'll just take a couple in order to show what I mean. So with the empiricists, you had the idea that one of the first principles that you had was that reality is sense data or sense datum, depending on how you look at it. And that was the first principle that these, among many of first principles that the empiricists use in order to try to construct coherent metaphysics. With the existentialists, you get this idea of freedom, and freedom is one of their first principles and one of the most important principles in their philosophy. Now, of course, those are only two examples. There's plenty of examples I could draw on, but the point is not to create a system like existentialism or empiricism, but the point is to focus on what a benefit is of having first principles and having principles to go on. It is, of course, very difficult to make our systems as precise and mathematical as Euclid, and that is unfortunate because of how precise his formulations are. But this is due in part to the fact that the world is so incredibly messy and that there's so many things happening. And so that's why I again say that we focus on first principles. And we can do this in various ways. You can do this by thinking, so if you were going to construct your own metaphysics, what you'd want to do is you'd want to come up with your own first principle or first principles. And you would want to do that by coming up with an assertion, a self-evident truth, or a seemingly self-evident truth that describes what reality is. And you would essentially want to build on that. Another example to prove the importance of first principles would be with ethics. One of the first principles that seems to be common in any field or any school of ethics, ranging from utilitarianism to intuitionism to Christianity, is this idea of reciprocity. And so this takes formulation in ideas such as the categorical imperative, such as the golden rule, such as the Confucius formulation of the golden rule. And this idea of reciprocity tends to be a first principle in ethics. And there's a reason for that. It's because, well, there are many reasons for it, such as the fact that we're biologically predisposed to think like this because we want to survive. And so it's an evolutionary description and an evolutionary explanation. But in terms of the principle itself, it seems to be a very stable foundation in order to build a system of ethics. And so therefore many philosophers use it. Now, I want to make it clear that first principles aren't the only way. First principles are also hard in any system of thought. that you would use. But I'm having this talk because I want to communicate the way in which first principles could be useful for at least being a starting point in this otherwise messy and complex world. Now, Nietzsche has a great formulation where he basically says that he hates people that build systems. So he hated Aristotle, he hated Plato, because he hated the fact that they were trying to build systems of thought and that they weren't living in an existential drift. Now, even though I like this claim and I think it's interesting, I tend to lean more towards the idea of first principles because I trust Euclidean geometry in terms of its methodology, and I also trust the idea of first principles in terms of deductive logic. And I think that we do need starting points. We do need building blocks. The only way that you can build something is by, of course, having a foundation, and that is what the first principles are supposed to do. So the idea to keep in mind is that no matter how complex things get, just refer back to Euclidean geometry and deductive logic in general, and you will be able to formulate first principles that will be able to be your foundation to build your own system of thought in this otherwise very complex and messy world. This is Phoenix, and thank you.